Okay, I mentioned a few times Emily Miller, the Washington D.C. reporter who did a series Emily Gets Her Gun. She's Emily Miller DC on YouTube, and she's Emily Miller on Facebook. You can follow her Facebook fan page. This is the most disgusting firearms case I have ever seen or heard of. And you know me, I do all the firearms cases, I do all the firearm laws, I talk about all high profile cases. This is the most disgusting. I will bet any of my viewers, any amount of money they want, they will never see a more disgusting story ever. Also, count how many times I say fuck while telling this story. There was a Army platoon lieutenant. He was the leader of an M1 Abrams platoon. He had served 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan. This story takes place in 2010, but Emily Miller is reporting on it now, so we're hearing about it now. Yeah, no, I haven't shaved. Look like a fucking mess. This guy was on... Hold on a fucking second. Yeah, fucking nose. And my friend the clock. My friend the clock. I have allergies, you gotta forgive me, I'm feeling like a motherfucker over here. Alright, it's a fuck. Anyway, he did 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan, and on his second tour of duty, he was in a vehicle crash, shattered his right arm, fucked up his face. The guy's name was Lieutenant Augustine Kim. Did I mention his name? Okay. He fucked up his face. He was medevaced to the hospital in Germany. Then he was medevaced to Walter Reed. He had to have facial reconstruction. He was in another hospital for 6 months, off and on, this surgery, that treatment, to repair his damaged body. He lives in South Carolina. His parents live in New Jersey. He had his weapons with his parents in New Jersey. Now, New Jersey has a magazine capacity ban and a weapons accessories ban. However, 99% of the time you have a state that has some kind of ban. The penal code specifically says that active military and active law enforcement are exempt from the ban. Also, majority of the time, if you're military on deployment and you have to leave your firearms in someone else's home in another state, they tend to just turn their head and let it go. Now, Governor Christie, it's a felony to have a hollow point bullet in New Jersey. The colonel of the state police cannot have a hollow point bullet in New Jersey. But there was a gentleman driving through New Jersey, pulled over, and sent to prison for having hollow point bullets. Governor Christie pardoned him. So when I said I wouldn't talk about Governor Christie, and I stick by that. So this guy leaves his weapons in his parents' house in New Jersey. So he's back from his second deployment in Afghanistan, in and out of the hospital, facial reconstruction, arm injuries, blah blah blah. He goes to New Jersey to pick up his guns from his parents' house. He's driving back down to South Carolina. Now, Federal Transportation of Firearms says that when you are going from one state to the next, you have to have your firearm in the trunk of your car unloaded. If you live in the state and you're driving in the state, then it's a different story, you know. Have the gun on your hip loaded or have it whatever. But if you're traveling from one state to another, you're supposed to have the guns unlocked, loaded, unloaded in the trunk, blah blah blah. He has his guns unloaded, locked in the trunk. Drives from his parents' house in New Jersey down to South Carolina. On the way there, he has to stop at Walter Reed Medical in Washington, D.C. for a checkup. He stops for his checkup. blah, blah, blah. On his way out, he takes a wrong turn somewhere and he gets lost in downtown DC. He gets pulled over by Metro. They run his driver's license. He had a speeding ticket. He paid for it. But sometimes you have a ticket, you pay for it, you pay it, but little snafu, and they say it wasn't paid for. Also, they said his driver's license was suspended. That information later proved incorrect. Don't forget, if you're on deployment overseas, your driver's license may expire. Some states have a special penal code in the DMV law that says if you're overseas with the military, they won't let your license expire. But they thought his license expired when it did not. They thought he had a speeding ticket when it was paid for. So now the cop says, let me search the car. Now, the Fourth Amendment, there are 20 plus reasons a cop can search you without a warrant and still be legal. One of them is consent. If a police officer asks permission to search you and you say, yes, you may search me, you cannot later complain that your privacy was violated because you gave consent. If he puts his gun in your face and says, can I search you, then that's not consent. But if you are not in fear of your life and you say, yes, officer, you may search my car, that's consent. Go sit down on the sidewalk curb. Search the car. In the trunk, bag of guns. What the fuck is this? I'm going home, North South Carolina, blah, blah, blah. Now here's the issue. Here's what I got. I don't know if he said this or they found it out later. But traveling through DC, you're supposed to travel continuous and uninterrupted. Now, if you're driving through Texas with a bag full of guns in the car, you can stop anywhere you want and no one's going to complain about it because it's Texas. They all got guns. They don't give a shit. But DC is different. No guns except for the military. Well, he was military, but DC hates guns. Ironic. It's our fucking nation's capital. Anyway. If he was just passing through DC, no question asked, just passed right through, he would have been fine. But because he stopped at Walter Reed Medical for a doctor's appointment, his travel was not continuous and uninterrupted. He stopped his travel through DC to stop at Walter Reed Medical for a medical appointment. Now, that made it a crime. Also, DC doesn't recognize any out-of-state gun owners, period. They hate guns, they hate gun owners. Also, DC has a mag cap limit. Most states, as long as it's pre-ban, they don't give a shit how many rounds it has in it. DC has no pre-ban. You're not going to have an 11-round magazine, period. Also, DC is like New York City. No AR. You're not allowed to have an AR, period. He had a Beretta, a 1911, Springfield Army 1911. I think it was the loaded model, you'll see it in a minute. An AR, and another gun I forget. He also likes to build 1911s. So he had a few parts in the bag which included lower receivers and frames and slides. Now, they arrest him. They bring him to jail. While he's in jail, he asks the corrections officer for a blanket because he's cold. And the corrections officer's like, well, they're back ordered. You know, some fucking things in life make you want to fucking puke. I mean, now keep this in mind. This is an Army National Guard officer who served at this point 2 deployments overseas, was severely injured on his 2nd deployment, was at that time scheduled for a 3rd deployment, this time to Kosovo, stopped at an Army hospital in the nation's capital for a medical appointment related to his injuries in overseas deployment. He is traveling through his nation's capital with his nation's battle rifle, the AR type rifle, and his nation's 2 signature handguns, the Beretta and the 1911. He goes to the Second Amendment Foundation. Mr. Gardner, whatever the fuck his name is. He was the guy that represented Heller in Heller versus DC. This is what he's charged with. He's charged with illegally transporting a firearm through DC. Now, like I said before, if he just went straight through and didn't stop at all, he would have been fine. But because he stopped for a medical appointment, that stop meant his travel was not continuous. And just for stopping at Walter Reed Medical, that alone made it a crime. He was facing 20 years in fucking federal prison. Yeah, my fucking allergies, I'm so sorry. Now, let's put this into perspective. November 2006, a friend of mine from high school was nailed by the FBI and the Yonkers police for crack conspiracy. Okay? He and 18 other guys were convicted of organized crime violations, RICO, for crack dealings in the county. He spent 18 months in a federal detention center in Manhattan, which is where John Gotti and Sammy the Bull were, while he's waiting for his case to be settled. After his case is settled, he is sentenced to just less than 10 years, which included time served. So between 18 months in federal detention, he has to serve another 7.5 years in federal prison. He's down south now in federal prison. He's been in custody since November 2006. He will be released from custody in September of 2015. Now, he was involved in a crack conspiracy, which is violation of federal law because it was an organized crime syndicate. Lieutenant Kim was an active lieutenant in the Army who served 2 deployments overseas and stopped at a military hospital for a medical appointment on his way home to South Carolina with his nation's signature firearms in his trunk. And he was facing more than twice as much time as my friend who was involved in an organized crime syndicate. Tell me what the fuck is wrong with this fucking country. What the fuck? I mean, I can understand hippies and politicians in San Francisco, New York City, and Chicago shitting on an army officer, but for the fucking nation's capital, I was so fucking livid. I wanted to fucking see. This is why I don't put my mother doesn't have guns by the computer, because I would have shot the fucking computer if I had a fucking gun at the computer. That's how fucking mad I was. I'm like, what the fuck? And it's not over. Now, here's what happened. Now, a prosecutor gets a police report on his desk. The prosecutor could say, I don't want to prosecute this. If it's any crime against a child, if it's domestic violence, the prosecutor must prosecute. Any other crime, he can throw it out. Murder. A guy can come in this apartment, okay? I could pull out my gun and shoot him in the fucking head. The police could send a report to the prosecutor. The prosecutor could say, Vinny acted in self-defense. Not gonna prosecute. Okay? A prosecutor can refuse to prosecute fucking murder. The judge can take the case and say, listen, man, we're not gonna prosecute. This is fucking, we're not gonna prosecute this. Throw him out. Okay? Now, if I were the police officer, I would have said, give me your ID, your military ID. I want to make sure you're a soldier, blah, 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 blah. Okay. You're not supposed to stop, Lieutenant. You're supposed to travel continuous and uninterrupted through DC, blah, 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 blah. Okay. You're going to get in the front of your car. I'm going to put the bag of guns back in the trunk. I'm going to close the trunk. I'm going to forget I ever saw you, and you're going to drive out of here as fast as you can. That's what I would have said if I was the guy. If I was the prosecutor, I would have taken the paperwork and I would have slapped the cop in the face with it. If I was the judge, I would have shredded the paperwork, grabbed my gavel, got down off the bench, and beat the prosecutor over the head with my gavel. Yeah. If I was the corrections officer in the city jail, I would have fell asleep with the keys in his cell. Okay? This is just fucking disgusting bullshit. Now, somewhere along the lines, they said, okay, plead guilty to one misdemeanor charge of traveling with one unloaded firearm, with one unregistered firearm in D.C. And then after he pled guilty, they decided to throw it out, just completely dismiss it. Now, he was deathly afraid that he would be discharged from the military. I had an uncle of mine in the Marine Corps before I was born. He's on leave, he's at a party, he leaves with his friend. He sits in his friend's car, his friend gets out of the car, goes into a convenience store, pulls out a knife and robs the clerk. Just for sitting in his friend's car. He gets 3.5 years in state prison. While he's in state prison, he was in prison when I was born. While he's in state prison, the Marine Corps sends him a dishonorable discharge. If you are convicted in civilian court, 99% of the time, it is an automatic dishonorable discharge from the military. Okay? So, this guy was looking at a dishonorable discharge from the military, which he was really concerned about too. He was concerned that he was not going to be able to serve our country. And he was more concerned about serving the country than he was about losing his Second Amendment right or about being sent to prison for 20 years. So, in the end, someone realized this is not a good case to prosecute. Let's let it go. Now, 2 points. His record is not expunged. Every time he applies for a job, every time he fills out a form, he has to say, yes, I was arrested for federal possession of an illegal firearm, of an unregistered firearm in D.C. Asterisk, the charges were dismissed. He has to say, I was arrested, charged with a federal felony, but it was dismissed. Please allow me to be a police officer. Please allow me to vote. Please allow me to have a gun. Please allow, okay, and next time he wants to buy a gun, he has to tell the gun dealer, yes, I was arrested because I had an unregistered gun in D.C. Talk about pissing on our fucking veterans. Also, the guns are still being kept by D.C. He's still demanding the guns back. He says he had $10,000 worth of guns. I don't know how that's worth $10,000. But, I mean, don't you want to just fucking punch somebody now? This is a fucking... I'm fucking disgusted by this shit. We're going to go over and see the guns now. And I'm going to cover up for security purposes. I don't want anybody to see the room. Covering. We're at the computer now. Okay. Springfield Armory, 1911 with an extended mag. Beretta 92 with a tactical light that hooks onto that lanyard down there hooks onto pack, I think. Another 1911. Oh, that is another 1911. I'm sorry, yeah, two 1911s, and looks like another Beretta. And he had an AR, and that's Lieutenant Kim right there. That's him. He looks good for a guy that got fucked up in a car accident, doesn't he? Okay. Covering up again. So, have I not satisfied you that that is the most fucking disgusting fucking display of bullshit gun control in U.S. history? That's how we thank that gentleman for his service to our country. We thank him by telling him we're going to put him in fucking federal prison for twice as long as a drug dealer because he was traveling to our nation's capital with 4 unloaded fucking guns in the trunk. And the fact that they had higher capacity magazines than 10, and the fact that one of them was an AR, which is banned in DC, didn't help the fact either. Our nation's battle rifle, 2 of our nation's signature handguns, 2 copies of each handgun, and you know, I want to fucking puke. That was Emily Miller's story. I'd like to thank Emily Miller for that story. Okay, thank you.